The gift side of the covenant seems to be very personal. God's gifts to me. Is that what theologians are talking about when they speak of God's providence?
Well, usually we think of providence just as you're describing it, in a very personal way, and that's part of it. As Christ says, the very hairs of your head are counted. That's Luke 12:7. That's a vital part of our belief in providence. But providence is also cosmic. It presides over the whole of human history as well as over our personal lives. As the Scottish Church says in one of its declarations, history is in the hands of God's holy keeping. Providence, therefore, is a way of talking about God's watch care of creation after the fall, the living out of God's promise to make sure that the world doesn't tear itself apart. Providence is the everlasting arms of God supporting the whole world. Again, just as the spiritual puts it, God has got the whole world in his hands. And part of that universal providence is giving a glimpse of the purposes of God. As it says in Acts 14:17, God has not left himself without a witness. Christian theology over the ages has come into some detail about all of this, saying that there are certain providential structures of life that hold human existence together, that make life livable, that restrain our sin, that keep the story moving forward. They were called by some orders of creation, put in place initially in God's intention. After the fall, they become orders of preservation. One of them is marriage and the family. Human sexuality fulfills itself in the male and female and the birthing of children that sustains creation and keeps it going forward. Another order of preservation is the state. Now, that doesn't mean that any one state is as it should be. We can challenge evil states, but we need covenants. We need somehow ways of civilizing our impulses to tear the fabric of human life. Another order, in addition to marriage and family and the state, is the order of economic structure. Now, the Bible doesn't prescribe any one way of economics, but somehow we need some order in society so there's food and clothing and shelter for all, and that our lethal human impulses to grab it all for ourselves are kept in check. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, providence is much more than these governing and ordering watch care activities of God in the structures of society. Providence is also very intimate. The psalmist, for example, says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me, and you're acquainted with all my ways." There is a personal providence that watches over each one of us, because God sees the sparrow fall and counts the very hairs of our head. And we praise God for this aspect of Noah's covenant, the angel care of each of us. The tender mercies of God are over all God's works, all of creation. Here is where the biblical teaching of supernature comes into early Christian belief that angels watched over their world.
What difference does all this about the covenant with Noah really make to us personally?
It gives us a confidence that there is a universal providence in human affairs and in all the world. We read it through Christian eyes. We believe it's Christ who holds the whole world in his hands, that the angelic hosts of Jesus Christ give the world its sustaining supports. And when things seem to fall apart, we know there is more to it than all the evil we see. And that's what gives us hope. The second thing it means is that we look around the world and acknowledge whatever is true and good and beautiful and holy in other religions and people of no religion. And we see even there Jesus Christ present incognito, watching over the world and giving it a glimpse of how the story can go forward. And thirdly, it means that there are expectations on the part of each one of us. There are rules for living together that we have to acknowledge in support of the orders of creation and preservation. We have to honor that and live according to those standards. Finally, it means that there is really a personal providence, that the eye of God does not ignore any one human being, that the angelic hosts are personally active, not only in the public world, but also with regard to persons. We might summarize the covenant with Noah by saying that the eye of God is on the sparrow as well as on the stars and on our societies.